Shabbat shalom. That was good. It's unusual for people to ask me how I'm doing. Usually it's the opposite. That's what I do for a living. I ask people how they're doing, and they tell me. But this week, I had a brief conversation with one of our congregants and a close friend who was really interested in my well-being. My response was that I had a great week, which is true. And even if I hadn't, I wouldn't have said. So no frustrations, she asked, this week? No, I didn't say that. Who said anything about frustrations? The nature of this work is to be frustrated. Not only have I come to expect it, I actually have learned to enjoy it. It's not some masochistic need for pain. I've come to believe that for me, and for anyone who has a calling, for anyone who feels called to a mission, who is driven to fulfillment and excellence, in the nature of the calling is the reality of frustration. Because if you're driven, if you believe that you have a purpose, that you are called to a principle, say justice, or healing, or scientific discovery, or new understanding of music, poetry, literature, or if you feel driven and called to teach the new generation, or if you are called to political leadership because you are driven to establish a better society, or even in business, if you are called to invent something that will change the world, say Facebook, or Twitter, or Google. I noted that Mark Zuckerberg said that more than wealth, what drives him and Facebook is social mission. Maybe. Whatever that calling may be, it is in the very nature of the calling to be frustrated. Pursuit of this calling will involve disappointments. Colleagues will disappoint you. The public will disappoint you. The establishment will disappoint you. You will disappoint yourself. You will discover that you did not quite have the energy, the skill, the talent, the intelligence, the je ne sais quoi that you thought you had. You will come to a deeper understanding of the human creature. Perhaps, as Mark Twain wrote, man, a creature made at the end of the week when God was tired. But I have come to believe that our best qualities and our maximum accomplishments are the result not of ease but of struggle. And struggle involves failure and frustration, to be called to something, to be driven by a central task is to be frustrated at our own and other people's shortcomings. The level of our success in some ways is proportional to the level of our frustrations. With respect to success, I now believe that even if you have tried to do something and failed, you are vastly better off than if you had tried to do nothing and succeeded. The first word in this week's Torah portion that introduces a new book, the book of Leviticus, is called Vayikra. Vayikra means calling, to be called. Vayikra el Moshe vayidaber Adonai elav. And God called Moses and spoke with him. The rabbis pick up on this unusual phrasing. Often the Torah simply states, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. And God spoke to Moses, saying, here in the beginning of Leviticus, God not only speaks to Moses, but calls him. The reason, say the rabbis, is to warn Moses of the impending frustrations. God uses softer language, according to the sages, the language of affection, because what God is about to ask Moses to do will be exceedingly difficult and will involve disappointment, anger, frustration, and failure. Moses was called to lead the people into the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the portable desert synagogue. He was called to establish this institution where the people would meet God and each other, and it would be this institution, the tabernacle, that would become the framework of all of Jewish life. The tabernacle later developed into the first and second temples that stood for 1,000 years, and ultimately into synagogues. This was the calling, to create an institutional mechanism where the ideas of Judaism could be taught, developed, expressed, and formulated into communal values and communal policies. And God cautioned Moses, this calling will involve frustration, daily frustration, because you, Moses, will be driven by it. But the people themselves have other things to do. They have flocks to tend, crops to grow, families to rear, mortgages to pay, professional aspirations to pursue. They will have other drives and other interests. Your calling is not their calling. Your priorities are not their priorities. Your passions are not their passions. And that will be frustrating for you. You will be disappointed in them and in your own capacity to inspire and to move them. And this is true for any calling. Any one of us who are driven by such passion in any human endeavor are inevitably frustrated by our inability to persuade more people to do more for the cause. There's a poignant midrash on this week's Torah portion, which primarily deals with sacrifices, offerings of animals and grains, the ancient equivalent of money, that the people would bring to the synagogue, the tabernacle. The sages say, there was once a woman who brought a handful of flour, and the Kohen, what we would call today the spiritual leader, the rabbi, became frustrated. See what little she offers? What is there to eat here? The priests would usually consume these offerings brought by the people. That's how they supported themselves, through the offerings brought by the people that would later be eaten. Kind of like today. You bring offerings to the synagogue, and that's how those of us who teach you and provide religious guidance make a living. That's how we put food on the table, because you bring offerings to the Mishkan. So the priest expressed extreme disappointment and frustration at the measly offering brought to the synagogue, the tabernacle. But it was said to him in a dream, do not be frustrated. It is regarded as if she had sacrificed her own life. In other words, for a poor person, a handful of grain is her life. The offering, the gesture itself is the gift. The point is that it is the calling, the purpose, the motivation that is the measure of the gift, not the actual amount. If you are rich in purpose, the tabernacle, the synagogue, will thrive. What we're seeing today in the Jewish world is not so much a poverty of means. And this is not to diminish the fact that there are many Jews who are truly struggling financially, and almost all of us we need to work to balance our accounts. But rather, what we are seeing today in the Jewish world is not a poverty of means, it is a poverty of purpose. What is the calling? What is the purpose? What are the priorities? That's why I try to remind myself regularly that the offerings brought by our people, and by this I do not mean money or only money, I also mean time, commitment, expertise, Jewish awareness, a fundamental sympathy with our calling, that the offerings brought by our people might seem insufficient to me. But if they are impoverished Jewishly, whatever they bring is commendable. And our task, our calling is to bring them back, to call them back. If we shall be rich in purpose, the Jewish world will be fine, and we will thrive. There's no comprehensive translation for the Hebrew word korban, usually translated as sacrifice. The main topic of the book of Leviticus is sacrifices. Offering is more accurate, but even that doesn't capture the full meaning of the word. While in other religious philosophies and modern usage, sacrifice connotes some self-denial, in Jewish thought, korban implies not self-denial, but affirmation. They would bring the korban to come close, karev, to come close to the calling. This is our task, to affirm the Jewish calling. There's some 20s and 30s here tonight with us. You should help us too. You bring the future to the tabernacle. We need to involve you. And you can point us towards what the Jewish world would look like in 20 years so that we can adapt accordingly today. Bring your offerings of intellect, understanding, intelligence, creativity, energy, a sense of the Jewishly possible and the possibilities of Judaism. All of us should be doing this, bringing offerings to the tabernacle. I mean the synagogue. But it starts with the calling. Because if we do not feel the calling, we have little really to bring to the tabernacle. Then it's just a cacophony of noise, and the offerings are insufficient. But if we bring the Jewish calling, a prioritization of Judaism, not something we do in our spare time, it will be as if we have brought our very lives. And even if we do not have a lot of time, because we're pursuing other responsibilities and even other interests and passions, nonetheless, if we feel called, it will be as if we have brought ourselves. And then the Jewish purpose and the Jewish people will prosper. In the words of the Haftarah of the week, Nishavta yachad, saper ata shuva elai ki ga'alticha. Help me, says the eternal God. Help me remember. Tell your version that you may be justified. Come back to me, and I will redeem you. I will sanctify your offerings and bless your future. Amen.